Hi there, back again, this time with a review and analysis of the season finale of Season 2 of The Walking Dead. The episode is titled Beside the Dying Fire. What I'm going to do over the next few minutes is talk not just about what happens in the episode, but try to connect it back to some of the previous things I've said in other videos, because as most good finales do, this episode ties together a lot of the things that we've seen previously. Of course, there are lots of loose ends because the group is moving, out of the farm, off the farm and into the unknown. But some things, some aspects of the season do coalesce, and we're given some direction and a little bit of closure about people's roles in the group. Anyhow, so I basically want to talk about the show in two ways. First, I want to talk about the main action on the farm, and then I'll talk about what's going on out on the road. So I won't dwell too much on the action of what happens on the farm. If you've seen the episode, okay, it's obviously spoilers coming, so go away if you haven't seen the episode. But obviously on the farm, mayhem, mayhem, mayhem. What's surprising is that only two people, I think, are killed, Jimmy and Patricia. Given how many walkers are there, I mean, it's a horde of walkers. It's amazing that only two people are killed. Of course, Andrea is left behind, and Carol is left behind briefly until Daryl comes back and gets her. But pretty light number of casualties given the death, the size of the horde of walkers, which tells us two things. First of all, these people have got really good at killing walkers, and it strains credulity to think that Glenn can hang out a card the car window as Maggie is doing donuts and still hit walkers in the head with his shots. I think I only saw a couple of misses in the episode. But what's maybe more important about that is the kind of symbolism of it, that it's the group together who are able to fend off the walkers long enough to escape, right? Single people, single characters aren't going to be able to do that. Hershel comes the closest, and I'll talk more about Hershel in a few minutes. But they need to work together. They need to band together. And as we'll see later on in this episode, Rick talks about the importance of staying together. He said that all season long, but in this episode we're going to see how the idea of staying together is going to change pretty radically going into next season. So the episode begins with this horde of walkers who leaving the city and walking along to the road to the country, seemingly led by the helicopter that they see fly overhead. Interesting, in the first episode, I think it was, Rick saw the reflection of, I think, an airplane in one of the buildings. So these flying machines, for whatever reason, seem to guide people and walkers in certain directions. Of course, it's important that the walkers make it to the farm for reasons of the plot. But there's another important reason that they do this, and that they make this journey, for the most part, on the very same road that the group had taken to get to Hershel's farm. And in one of my previous videos about Hershel's farm, it's called Hershel's Farm, the Pastoral and Hershel. I'll post a link in a bubble here to it. But in that, I talk about how in the show, the city and the country are supposed to be opposed places, different places. The city is a place of corruption and death. It's a fallen world. And the country is a place of rejuvenation and health and spiritual well-being that tries to keep itself safe from the outside world of the city, but is never able to do it. And at the end of that video, I said we're going to see really the boundary between the farm and the city breached completely when the walkers stroll in. And one of the things I said in that video is that is the importance of the highway. And I said the highway is important because it's the road for people to get to the country, that space of rejuvenation and well-being. But I said it's also the path along which the evil or the fallen aspects of the world of the city can get there. So the road is good, the road is bad. It admits people who can take advantage of the pastoral space, but it also admits the negative sides of the urban space to get into. Uh, da, 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 da. One of the things that does get wrapped up a little bit here involves Daryl. Daryl had been moving farther away from the group, camping away from the group with his tent out there, whittling what looks like homemade arrows. And Carol comes out and tries to entice him back to the group. And he says basically he doesn't want any part of it, and she sees his dead squirrel and zombie ear collection. But in this episode, Daryl seems to have taken off on his motorcycle, but he comes back for Carol. He saves her, and he's been sort of resisting the bond that she seems to want to make with him. But here he cements he cares for her, and he retrieves her. Later on, when the group has got back together, it's Daryl who says, we have to go after Andrea. Remember, it wasn't so long ago that Laurie went to Daryl and said, when Rick was in town looking for Hershel, Laurie went to Daryl and said, can you please go after them? And Daryl said, I'm done. I'm done doing that. I'm not looking out for anyone anymore, because he'd been frustrated by what happened to Sophia, mostly. Now he's come back around. He's fully part of the group, as I said at the end of my previous video. Okay, so two other important things happen here. One involves the barn burning down, and the last shot we see of the farm is the barn actually totally aflame, collapsing in upon itself. And that signals, I think, pretty clearly the destruction of the pastoral space. The idea that the place of health and rejuvenation has now been completely destroyed. And why has it been destroyed? Because something from the fallen world of the city has entered into its space, has traversed all of its boundaries, and completely infected it. And I talked earlier about how the place is already infected, figuratively because of the zombie in the well, and literally because Randall is now in this space. But when we see the walkers there and the barn that's burned to destroy and distract them, this is pretty clearly the end of the pastoral space here. And what's interesting about it isn't that the walkers break down the place, it's Rick and Carl who set fire to the barn. Now they do it for obvious reasons. They're doing it to save themselves and others. But the fact that Rick and Carl do it is important, I think, because Rick now, and we're going to see this by the end of the episode, is himself becoming completely consumed, just as the barn is by flames, with not his better angels, his worse angels, the worse aspects of his character. And I just mean that figuratively here, but the fact that he destroys the barn suggests, well, earlier on in a previous episode, when Hershel was asking them to leave, Hershel said, you're like a plague. I need to get you, you need to leave, you're like a plague. And basically you threaten to destroy the farm and the pastoral scene. Rick literally does that here, and remember, this happens between two acts. His killing of Shane, which he had to do in self-defense, and then his revealing to people out on the road that they're all infected, and then really taking a dramatic turn, seemingly for the worse, when he tells them this isn't going to be a democracy anymore. More on that later. One thing I did want to talk about, though, is Hershel. Hershel, who stands there, this is the guy who, the first time he saw walkers being killed at the barn, he sunk to his knees and he had that crazed look on his face. He was distraught. But now, he's got out his shotgun, his pump-action shotgun, and he's blowing walkers away like crazy. And I fully expected him to be overrun. Rick ends up actually saving him. But he was badass in that scene. And he says, as it's going down, he says, I'll die here. And then later he says, it's my farm. And Rick says, not anymore. Well, that's important for the reason I just talked about. The idea that Hershel had said to Rick that the group was inhabiting the farm and that this pastoral space was going to be changed because of the people who get into it and contaminate it. Now Rick himself has said that it's changed. It's not yours anymore. Remember in an earlier episode, as I said in one of my videos, Rick goes to Hershel and says, this place is special. It's untouched. Not anymore. It isn't untouched. That's why Rick can say to Hershel, it's not your farm, it's not anymore. We might think for a moment that Hershel will be a new Dale figure because he protects the people and he later urges Rick and Carl to move on and leave him behind so Carl can be safe. You might say, well, that's a bit like Dale, you know, goodness, protectiveness, a kind of idealism. But his shooting of the walkers suggests that he isn't quite, you know, idealistic. And he also admits to Rick out on the road that he's completely lost faith and that he feels like a fool for having had faith in the first place. One thing that's interesting, though, the barn burns down. I don't think we ever see what happens with the house. I don't think that we ever see walkers get into the house. Hershel defends it. And what's interesting about that symbolically is that although the barn is destroyed, which suggests the destruction of the farm, the house remains intact. And remember in a previous episode on the pastoral on Hershel's farm, I said that in the pastoral, the idea of home is really important. The fact that the literal home, the house, isn't destroyed here, I'll have to check to make sure it isn't, but I'm pretty sure. The fact that that isn't destroyed suggests that the idea of home might still exist. And it does, because when they're out on the road, we have the new group that's down to, I think, nine members. And Rick says to them, you know, we're together now. We're all together. We'll find a place. We'll find a way. We have to. And that those first moments on the road are moments of reunion. Rick and Laurie, even though they're separated, both have the same idea, and think each other will have that idea, to go back to where Sophie was lost. And they both end up there, and we see the people come. You know, Daryl with Carol on the bike, and then T-Dog and Laurie, and then I can't remember who follows behind them, but anyhow, oh, Glenn and Maggie. They all end up there, and Rick says, we're together. What this suggests, here's another episode where they end up being on the road again, just like the conclusion to the first season. But it suggests that they think of themselves as a group, that even if the literal home has been destroyed, they've taken the idea of home with them, that they're a community, and that together they can survive, just as they did on the farm. And Rick says to Hershel, we have to stay together, even, and then later when he runs out of gas, he says, we're together, we'll find a place. So Rick is reinforcing the idea of togetherness and a kind of portable idea of home. Well, after that, things take a turn for the worse. Rick reveals that everyone is a carrier of the infection, and he tells first Laurie and then the rest of the group about Shane. And it's after he tells Laurie and then tells the group about this that we really see Rick take a kind of nasty, maybe even evil turn. When he tells Laurie about having killed Shane and how he wanted to stop, Laurie recoils in horror and walks away. And think of how different that is from when they first meet on the road. Reunited, they embrace, but now they break apart there. It's a threat to the community, I think. And Rick tells the group about Shane, and then he sounds a lot like Shane, and he says, you know, I've saved you. And he says, this isn't a democracy anymore. If you're staying, this isn't a democracy anymore. He had said almost virtually the same thing to Shane in the episode 18 Miles Out after their big fight. They're out on the road, and Rick says to Shane, you know, if we're going to get past this, you're going to have to follow my lead. He takes charge there. He takes charge again at the end of the season finale, but he does it in an almost malevolent way. There's something scary. There's something frightening about him there. So the group is going to be led strongly by him. What will that do to the dynamic of the group? We don't know. The episode, two more things happen in the episode. We see Andrea, you know, who has survived and is killing walkers, and then she's rescued by this hooded figure who we will learn next week is this figure called Michonne. Won't say any more about that because I don't know the comics. The other thing we see is in the final scene, we go from the group, pans up and out to a prison we see in the background, in the distance. So what I want to suggest is that here, a season that really began in a pastoral enclosure, a beautiful enclosure, a healthy enclosure, now we see these people moving toward another enclosure, the prison, an other fallen world, an enclosure that doesn't contain good or healing, presumably, but that's going to contain malice and hatred and death. I want to say one other thing, because I thought of something after the episode last night. Shane says they're all carriers, but I wonder about the baby. Because what if it was only airborne and can't be transmitted from mother to child in utero? If the baby can live, that suggests how the series is going to end. Almost everyone might be wiped out, and Laurie might die in childbirth, who knows? But maybe the baby is going to live, which would suggest, if it happens, that the baby is a redemptive figure, just as any newborn child suggests hope. And I won't say any more about the Christian overtones of that. I'm sure you can figure them out. I'll have new videos coming up soon.